In this problem, the function given is, we're told that it's not one-to-one. And then we're asked to determine the domain restriction that will preserve all the range values and state the domain in the range. And then using the inverse, you find the inverse and state its domain and range. So first of all, it would be helpful if I knew what this graph looked like. So let's see. My first clue here is that this denominator can never equal 0, and if it does, that's going to give me an asymptote. So if the only way to get that to be equal to 0 would be, let's see, let's take the square root of both sides. We get x minus 3 equals 0, then x equals 3. So if x equals 3, there must be an asymptote right there. It will never be equal to 3. So that's our 3, 2, 1. And what else can I tell about this graph? At this point, I think I would plug in some numbers and see what happens around that asymptote. Let's do, it's not y, it's v. This is x, this is v. And we have, let's see, we're going around the 3. We know it goes infinitely either up or down, the asymptote, since it can never cross. So let's do what happens from 0, 1, and 2, and then let's see what happens at 4 and 5. Let's see if we can get some shape here. Just an idea of the shape. Okay, so when I plug in 0 for x, I get negative 3 squared in the denominator, so that gives me 8/9. So at 0, I have about, it's about there, 8/9. And when I plug in 1 in the for x, I get 1 minus 3, so that's negative 2 in the denominator. Squared gives me a 4. So I have 8/4, so that's 2. So if I plug in 1, I get a 2. If I plug in a 2, I get a negative 1 squared, which is 1, which is 8. It looks like it's going up really fast now. So it looks like, since I know there's an asymptote here, it's got an upward behavior. I also know that this function has an asymptote here. And let's see what else is going on. Then on the right, let's put in a 4 for x, and we go 4 minus 3 gives me a positive 1 squared, which is 8. So it looks like we're going to have the same kind of thing going on over here on the other side. I plug in a 5 for x, I get 2 squared, which gives me the 4, which 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. So you can see the same kind of pattern happening over here. And I'm thinking if we put in a 6, we'll get that, we'll get a reflection of this guy over the asymptote too. So 6 minus 3 gives me 3 squared, which is 9, so that's 8/9. So you can see this pattern kind of repeating itself, going along this asymptote, the vertical asymptote and the horizontal asymptote. So that's the shape of our graph. And you can see how it's not one-to-one, because if I were to try to draw it is definitely a function, because I can do all these vertical lines and no problem. But I can't do horizontal lines because everywhere there's actually 2 points. But if I just look at the right half of the graph, then I am looking at just this curve. I get the whole range, and I don't have any double answers. So I'm going to cross off the left hand, and I'm going to use my domain starting at 3. So let's see. So for part A, determine the domain restriction. That means I'm going to restrict all my x values to be greater than 3, not equal to, because there's an asymptote at 3, so it won't be equal. Anything greater than 3. And whatever I plug in an x that's greater than 3, I will get something on this side of the asymptote. Okay, and that will preserve the entire range. And then part B says to find the inverse. So in part, that's part A. So part B, we're going to switch our y and x. So we're going to have x equals 8 over, y is actually a v here, so we'll do v minus 3 squared. And solve for v. So we get, I'm going to cross multiply. I'll put this over 1. So I can cross multiply and I get v minus 3 squared. X equals 8. Divide both sides by x. I get v minus 3 squared equals 8 over x. Take the square root of both sides and I get v minus 3 equals plus or minus. But I know it's plus because I'm looking at just the right hand side. So that will be a plus. So we're looking for all the x's being greater than 3. So that'll be a plus radical 8 over x. And then adding 3. V equals radical 8 over x plus 3. Well, let's back up to part A because I realize now that I forgot to state the domain and range. We did the domain, and the range is v greater than 0. Let's go back to part B now. So our domain and range are going to switch in our inverse. So now my domain is x greater than 0, and my range is v greater than 0. So there's part B, and there's part A. Whoops, sorry. V is greater than... Undo. Okay, v is greater than 3. Switching the domain and range from part A. Okay, so there's the final answer. And there.
You still in there?